Welcome to another episode of Gaming and Performance. I am back with another video, and this time I want to explain the importance of why you should disable threaded DPCs. Now, before I get started here, I want to give an explanation as to what threaded DPCs are before I explain why you want to disable them. And I'll start directly from Microsoft's website itself. Now, threaded DPCs are available in Windows Vista and later versions of Windows. So prior to Windows Vista, they weren't using threaded DPCs. That's very interesting, very intriguing. If you were gaming before installing Windows Vista, you would remember that gaming was a lot better back then. But, I digress, and this is just my opinion. But let me continue here. A threaded DPC is a DPC that the system executes at an IRQL equal to passive level. Threaded DPCs are enabled by default. Well, they've been enabled by default since Windows Vista. But you can disable them by setting the H key, local machine, system, CCS, control, session manager, kernel, and adding a 32-bit Dword called ThreadDpcEnable and setting the registry to 0. When threaded DPCs are disabled, they execute as ordinary DPCs. Now, they call them ordinary DPCs. Personally, I think that's the wrong word for it, but I'll explain why in a minute. Now, an ordinary DPC preempts the execution of all threads and cannot be preempted by a thread or by another DPC. Now, before I continue here, I want you to understand what preempts mean. It says here, take action in order to prevent an anticipated event from happening. Act in advance of something, of someone, in order to prevent them from doing something. Acquire or appropriate something in advance. So it's almost like predicting or prediction. You're going to need to do this because it's going to prevent this from happening, kind of thing is the best example I can give. Understand what preempt means. Let's go back. If the system has a large number of ordinary DPCs queued, or if one of those DPCs runs for a long time, every thread will remain paused for an arbitrary long time. Thus, each ordinary DPC increases system latency, which can hurt performance of time-sensitive applications such as audio or video playback. Conversely, a threaded DPC can be preempted by an ordinary DPC, but not by other threads. Therefore, you should use threaded DPCs rather than ordinary DPCs unless a particular DPC must be preempted, not even by another DPC. You're sitting back trying to figure out, okay, what does this all mean? You're talking about threaded DPCs. Give me an example. Okay, your keyboard could use threaded DPC, or in this case, an ordinary DPC if you disable it. Your mouse can, your video card can, etc. What that means is when you start Windows takes note of all your peripherals that you're using, and they can use a threaded DPC. Now, they are threaded if you keep this enabled, which means that they can be preempted, which means that other threaded DPCs can interrupt its process to complete something else. It could be anything that they design Windows to do, and get back to it at a later time. I find that rather disturbing because if I want to give higher priority to my mouse, my keyboard, my video card, etc., I want to make sure that it's not interrupted. I want everything else to wait until that movement on my mouse is finished before something else could do whatever. I think that's more important. That is the point of me why I disabled threaded DPCs, because I find that my keyboard, mouse, video card, etc. are more important than anything else. And I think that everything else should wait until those operations are finished before anything else can execute if your CPU cannot process other DPCs or threaded DPCs, which it can, by the way. Times have changed. Even though this article was written in 2021, we had processors back then that can execute an inordinate amount of threaded DPCs, which this should normally not be a problem. You should need, with a modern CPU, to have a threaded DPC when the CPU can and does process a ton load of threaded DPCs, or as they call it, ordinary DPCs when it's disabled. So I disable it because I'm confident that my setup can process just enough ordinary DPCs where if something else needs to wait, it's either A, not that important to begin with, or B, my processor can process them all without there having to be an inordinate amount of time creating latency. So this is not needed. It's a little odd because before Windows Vista, that's how it worked. So why did it change? I don't know. Reinventing the new wheel. You know, they got a new wheel. This is the best wheel. This is the wheel we should be using, kind of thing. And that's the way I read into it. How do I know this? Oh, how did I come to this opinion? Well, let's go to another article a few years later called How to Set Up a Device for Real-Time Performance, done in 2023, 2 years later. And one of the particular tweaks it tells you to do is actually disable threaded DPCs right here. Here's the console command. Doesn't give you a whole lot of detail, but telling you that doing this is going to allow you to set up a device for real-time performance. So apparently, when you keep this enabled and your ordinary DPCs become threaded DPCs, you are not getting anywhere close to real-time performance until you disable it, which is why I wanted to create this video and bring some level of awareness, because I noticed some things going back and forth, spending about 3.5 weeks doing this. I noticed that when I input this command here it is in Windows PowerShell. This is me disabling it right here. I noticed a couple things. Share with you with it right here. It lowers processors over time. What that means is, what I noticed was that even when I had it at its default, I would go to Task Manager and I would notice that after waiting about a minute after a reboot, if it read 40 processes, it would stay at 40 processes 3 and 4 hours later. It would rarely change, if at all. I never noticed it changing. However, when I disabled Threaded DPC enabled, I noticed that processes were disappearing. The total number of processes through Task Manager would decrease, and that was consistent. That's the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed is that instantly when I boot up my PC after making this change through a reboot, my mouse movement will show lower latency by being more responsive and less restrictive than before. It's kind of like you got to do this yourself. You got to do this right now, right? See how your mouse moves. Open up Windows PowerShell, copy and paste this command. I'll leave it in the description. Reboot your PC, go back into Windows and start moving your mouse again. And you'll notice instantly that something's different. Something's way different, and you feel that this is more intuitive. The way the cursor is responding to your movements of the mouse is more intuitive than it was before. It's the best way to explain it. I also noticed that latency mod can be used quicker and show lower latency without the wait time I had before, up to about 10 minutes. Now, with Threaded DPC enabled at its default, I normally wait about 10 minutes before I start latency mod. That way I didn't get any other processes running in the background that it normally does. But with it disabled, I can almost do it within like 2-3 minutes, and I still show that lower latency. Now, it's not lower than before. It seems to do it a lot more quicker. Again, going back to Task Manager, where processes start disappearing from Task Manager and lowering my total processes even after about a minute or two of waiting for Windows to do its thing, doing a fresh reboot. Another thing I noticed was that I was getting better benchmark 1% and 0.1% lows with Threaded DPCs disabled. Consistently going back and forth, I only used Modern Warfare 2. I noticed that because it does give a lot of good data in it. 1% lows, and I think it was 5% or something like that. They were a lot higher with it disabled than it was enabled. And I didn't change anything else. Using the same exact drivers, use the same exact speed of the GPU and the RAM. Nothing changed. So these are the things I'm noticing with it disabled, and I want you to try it for yourself. Now, you can try it for yourself, and if you don't like the results, you can go into the registry, find Threaded DPC enabled by going to HKey local machine system, CurrentControlSet, control, session manager, kernel. And when you find the D word for Threaded DPC enabled, with a value of 0, just delete it and reboot the PC. That's all you need to do. And it goes right back to the way it was before. But I have a belief that you won't do that because you will notice something better that you didn't notice before, especially with your mouse movement. And in games itself, I'm noticing that it seems to help with in-game ping. Not saying that it's lower, but it seems like I'm be on time with the server sort of thing. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's not that that's what it's doing exactly. I just don't have any other words to describe it, but I seem to have an advantage against opponents. Not so much so that I notice it right away, but it seems to be just slightly a little better than before. Like my system is ready to respond to any inputs I send to the server so that a shot is registered more quickly, my movements are registered more quickly, etc. If someone's shooting at me, I'm able to just dart a little bit faster out the way and to keep from being killed in the game than I did before. Those kind of things I've noticed. Now, it's very slight. It's not something that you will see a dramatic difference of, but it's something I noticed. It disabled it. So I do hope this helps you. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.